Hello, you filthy animals. Welcome back to the James Kennedy podcast. I hope you've all been awesome since the last time we spoke. I'm a little bit hoarse right now, man, because I've been gigging all weekend with James Kennedy and the Underdogs and drinking a little bit too much whiskey. So if I start to sound like Marge Simpson, that's why. We are living in interesting times right now, man. We got a general election coming up in 2 weeks. And if there's one thing that's uniting all of us right now, it is universal hatred of the Tories. That evil, horrible cartel of pompous, out-of-touch rich dudes that have been looting, ransacking, dividing, and destroying this country and the country's morale and spirit for way too long now. But this time we've got the added problem of the usual alternative, that is the Labour Party, being absolutely useless, bought and sold by the same powers that be as the Tory party. Keir Starmer is a Blairite, Tory-like career politician who won't even condemn a genocide, and lies and contradicts himself at any given opportunity, quite openly in front of the world's media, without any shred of remorse, shame, or even embarrassment. So it's a tricky one. The traditional Labour voters have got no love for Labour, and nobody's got any love for the Tories. In fact, I would say we all violently despise them at this point. So thank God there's now a very viable alternative that is gaining momentum all around the country. I am talking, of course, about the Green Party, a party that I've been a member of for many years now and have been a vocal supporter of. And it is great, and it is about time to see them gaining so much popularity around the country. Because for me, the Green Party are now doing the job that the traditional Labour Party would have done or should have done, in that they represent us, the everyday people of this country that need good hospitals, employment protections, less inequality and more protection for our most vulnerable. And a lot of other stuff which we're going to do a deep dive into in this episode, including, of course, an actual green policy for the protection of our environment and, of course, to combat the ever-looming crisis of the climate. So I will be devoting this entire episode to the Green Party, the party that I will be voting for. And if you want to live in a society that's healthier, more prosperous, fairer, kinder, and better for everybody, you should too. And hey, look, this is not going to be an unbiased or impartial conversation. This is my podcast, and I'll plug what the hell I like. So strap in, because we're about to dive feet first into the Green Party's manifesto and policies and politics, and hopefully convince you all to come and join us on the side where the grass is most definitely greener. And who better to join me for such a conversation than Mr. Zack Polanski, Deputy Leader of the Green Party of England and Wales, and a super cool dude with a lot to say. So let's get down to business and welcome onto the show, Mr. Zack Polanski. Thank you so much for joining us, man. How you doing?
I'm great, James. Thanks for having me on. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you, man. A little bit worse for wear, as I said, but hey, that's my own fault. But I mean, it must be a crazy busy time for you, right now with everything, happening with the election coming up and everything. So what's going on with you right now, man? What's happening?
It's pretty wild at the moment. So as we're recording this, there's a lot of running around the country, a lot of that as usual. But actually, I'm up for re-election in London myself. So I've been visiting every borough in London. It's a really cool time, though. Like, I love the actual job of being elected, but I also really, really enjoy the campaign. In some ways, even more so, because there's no meetings, there's no bureaucracy, no voting. It's just being out and about with communities and hearing what's important to them. And it's a lot of fun, too. So, yes, it's a lot of hard work, but actually, I think it's important to enjoy it, too.
Oh, 100%, man. Yeah, and I think it's just unfortunate that for most people, they only really see their elected representatives or potential representatives during election time, like now, when they're all knocking the door, canvassing for votes. But the Green Party, for me, have always felt like a party that's much more connected to and built upon the grassroots, direct involvement with their members and the community generally.
I think that's exactly it. We always have resisted the idea of being a top-down party. And although I'm deputy leader, the party policies are made by members. So it's one member, one vote. If someone joined the party this morning or they've been in the party 20 years, they kind of have equal power in terms of their say when it gets to the conference floor. And exactly what you said, I really enjoy going around the country and seeing what our councillors are doing, because very often it's supporting a grassroots campaign that they have then got involved with in the council chamber. So campaigning is really important. It's also really important to get elected, because that's how you turn that kind of energy and that momentum into making sure that essentially when decisions are made, they're made by the right people.
Yeah, I love it, man. And I want to get into, the policies and the manifesto of the Green Party. But before we do that, I think it's important to remind everybody where we're at right now, where we're starting from after God knows how many years of Tory devastation. I'm sure nobody wants a reminder of that because we're all feeling it pretty hard right now. But before we look at the solutions that you guys have got to offer, I think it would be good to just have a recap on exactly where we're at right now. So what is your assessment? What is your take of where we are at in the UK right now?
Well, I think it's actually broken. We've had 14 years of conservative austerity that has damaged our public services. It's also been toxic and divisive. If you're a migrant, a trans person, a person of colour, someone who's disabled, any of those marginalised communities in particular have been hit harder almost than any other community. But it's not just for Conservatives' 14 years of austerity. It's also a legacy left by Tony Blair and neoliberalism that goes back decades in this country. And it's really, people are looking for something different and an alternative. And naturally, I'm here to argue that is the Green Party, and that we are the party that offers hope. But hope is not just like buying a lottery ticket and sitting around waiting for your numbers to come up. Hope is active involvement. It's about getting involved with those local campaigns we were just talking about, making sure you vote, and also getting involved with the party. And I think that is the difference here. I think back to the Conservatives, it's not just for policies as well. It's the way that they've done politics. It's for lies, for misinformation. It's for nastiness and running towards culture wars. So people would look to the Labour Party, in the past to be the natural opposition to that. But on every really key issue from Keir Starmer, we've seen him completely complicit with the Conservatives, complicit at best, at worst, sometimes even going further than the Conservatives and the nastiness. So some very quick examples. So I'm qualifying that statement. The two-child benefit cap, experts say this is one of the leading kind of policies that is keeping children in poverty in this country. 1 in 4 children are growing up in poverty, and it's even worse in Wales, where you're speaking from, James. I think it's 1 in 3 there. One of the biggest things we could do, not the only thing, but something that would really make a difference, is to lift that child benefit cap. The argument is not a hard argument to make. No child should be living in poverty. And, people can make arguments about parents' choices. I'd even argue against some of those arguments. But even if we took those arguments as correct and legitimate, it is still not the child's fault that they're growing up in poverty based on decisions made before they're even born. So it's cruel, it's inhumane. And I think, to see the Labour Party backing the Tories on that is grim. Then we've got all policies on workers' rights. I'm really proud to stand on picket lines with workers. Labour have criticised me before, saying this is performative. And actually, they wouldn't do this because governments in waiting don't stand on picket lines. That's absurd. If you're someone who wants to run the country, I can think of very few places more important for you to be than with working people, listening to their disaffection. Is that the only thing you should be doing? No, not at all. If you're just doing that, then it's performative. But that's a very basic and necessary step in order to then make policies, to then be voting based on having listened to people on the picket line. And then I couldn't end this answer without talking about what we're seeing in Gaza, the absolute atrocities that have been committed, where I was going to say Labour have turned their head away, but I think that's even too generous to them. We've seen in Keir Starmer someone who is cheer-led, who has said things like Israel has the right to defend itself, whilst also talking about cutting off water and electricity. I'm pleased that the Labour Party have moved position slightly on this, but we're still nowhere where we needed to be. And meanwhile, every day that this goes on, innocent people are losing their lives. And it's really important that both the Conservative government and the Labour Party are held to account on that. People will say, what difference can a Labour opposition make, or what difference even can the Prime Minister make? But they're not looking at their history. There have been times before where we've had these kind of incursions from the Israeli government, and then the UK have abstained or even voted against at the United Nations, voted for a ceasefire. That resulted in America abstaining, and that resulted in Israel calling a ceasefire. The whole point of being an elected politician, the whole point of being involved in politics, is to use the leverage you have to put pressure on the people who make the decisions, whether that's regionally, nationally, or internationally, to make the right decisions. And I can think of very few examples more important than the life and death of what's happening in Gaza and Israel at the moment, where the Labour Party should have been there from day one, calling this Israeli government to account. Yes, making the argument about releasing the hostages. Yes, making the argument about ending the violence altogether. But, even to have Sadiq Khan yesterday, and Sadiq, by the way, I'm sure we'll get into this because I work to hold Sadiq Khan accountable in the London Assembly. That's my job. On some issues, he's not that bad. He's certainly better than Boris Johnson. I think there's certainly gaps in his plans. But it was really grim to see him yesterday standing against the boycott of Israeli products and goods and services. This isn't, a blanket boycott. This is a targeted boycott. So this is saying, if a musician or an athlete wants to represent the Israeli government, whether that's at the Olympics, whether, yes, that's at Eurovision, wherever it is, that shouldn't be allowed. And that's the exact same logic we followed with Russia, And also the Green Party have a list of about 20 other countries that we've called for boycotts on in the last few years. So this is not, this is not Israel being picked out or singled out. This is about standing against regimes or governments that are not holding human rights law in any way, shape, or form.
Amen, man, and brilliantly put. I'm glad you brought that up as well, because the issue of Israel and Palestine and what is happening in Gaza right now really does demonstrate, unfortunately, the lack of difference between Labour and the Conservatives when it comes to the big issues that actually matter. And with regards to Keir Starmer, it calls into question his moral compass. Can we trust a guy that won't even denounce what is happening? How can we trust someone that can't even bring himself to acknowledge that the loss of innocent children's lives is a disgrace and we need to have a ceasefire right now? What's so difficult about saying that? So yeah, unfortunately, as you rightly mentioned, since the Blair years, there is very little difference now between Labour and the Conservatives. Thankfully, that's where you guys come in now, which is why I was previously a member of Labour, for most of my life until, the past few years when I joined the Green Party. So even though we are living in bleak times and desperate times, and a lot of people are struggling and feeling the burn, harder than I've ever known in my life, there is hope, because there is now, for the first time in a long time, an actual ideological alternative.
I realised I missed a very other obvious one too, but that's for £28 billion investment in the green economy, and I'm sure we'll get onto that. But the Labour Party for a long time have tried this argument: if you want green measures, you shouldn't vote green, you should vote for Labour. But then again, on the most basic of measures to invest in a Green New Deal, I always thought, I didn't talk about the £28 billion. This was what they were pledging too much before they dropped it, because I always presumed there was no way they were going to drop this. I thought they were kind of creating a false drama, because £28 billion isn't nearly enough. But I thought if they wind up the green environmental movement enough that we all start shouting £28 billion and then they do it, they could proclaim themselves as the hero of the environmental movement. But to see them even drop that is pretty grim. Because, so if we take retrofitting, for instance, this is like upgrading people's homes to make sure that they're not leaking energy and they're not cold and damp and moldy. We have the leakiest housing stock in Europe. So we already have houses that are creating bills that are astronomical for people. And people talk about a cost of living crisis, but really this is an inequality crisis, because you have multimillionaires and billionaires doing better than they ever have before. In fact, they've often profited from the pandemic. And then you've got people who are living in these leaky homes whose bills are going higher and higher and higher. And if you invested in retrofitting, so upgrading these homes, that's a triple win. Yes, it reduces the emissions on the planet. It reduces their bills, really important in an inequality crisis. But it also creates good green jobs that we can make sure in the public sector that are trade unionized, that can look at a different kind of society that we're building to get ready to tackle the climate crisis. Again, these arguments are not hard to make. And any future government that wants to proclaim to be progressive, or, give the very kind of least care and compassion towards tackling the climate and nature emergency, should be able to put front and center of their policies tackling the climate crisis and the investment needed to do that at the front and center. But instead, we have this Labour Party that say we have to stick to our own fiscal rules. Those fiscal rules, by the way, are completely imaginary. They're completely made up by the Labour Party. And the number one fundamental fiscal rule, I would say, is to tax the wealthiest, multimillionaires and billionaires. If we tax their assets, so that's those with £10 million or more in assets, just 1%, we'd be raising tens of billion pounds a year that we could be putting straight into the green economy. But they've even ruled out wealth taxes. So anyway, I always take a pause here, because there's not words for how sick I am of the Conservative government and how much they need to go, and we need to get rid of them. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. But I think everyone's at that point now. So I find myself sometimes talking more about the Labour Party than the Conservative Party, just purely because I take it as read that people know we need this government to go. But I don't think it's good enough to just be a little bit better than the worst ever government we've had, certainly in our lifetimes, if not in history. You've got to offer the electorate a little bit more than that, or a lot more than that. And on that's where the Labour Party seem to actively be inflaming tensions and pretending to be Tory light, as opposed to offering a real credible alternative.
I 100% agree with you. I'm more angry at the Labour Party than I am at the Tories, because I don't expect anything better of the Tories. But the Labour Party, they're supposed to be our party, the party of the people, the party that was founded upon the trade union movement and workers' rights. The party that gave us the NHS, the party that's supposed to protect us from the interests of the elite. And to see them now completely co-opted by the interests of the 1%, and to the point where you couldn't get a Rizzler paper between them and the Tory party, just absolutely infuriates me. I feel let down by the party, I'm disappointed, and I'm deeply angry at the disrespect to the party's history and the principles upon which it was founded. And I wanted to ask you, how did we get here with the Labour Party? What happened? How did it go from the party of the people to Tory light? What's your take on how that happened?
It's a really good question, and I guess other people would probably be more qualified to answer better than I have if they've been at the heart of the Labour Party. Certainly Owen Jones, who recently has endorsed the Green Party alongside independents, has talked about the dishonesty of Keir Starmer's campaign. So here's a man who flew on the coattails of Jeremy Corbyn, said that Jeremy Corbyn was right to challenge anti-austerity. Keir Starmer was very kind of anti-Brexit, while that was inconvenient for Jeremy Corbyn. But then as soon as he became the leader of the Labour Party, seems to have dropped conversations about the EU entirely. And then there's lots of other pledges, including proportional representation, where Keir Starmer was making warm noises about it. The Labour Party as a whole voted for proportional representation at their conference. And then Keir Starmer just said no. And I think, sometimes I hear the argument, and I think if I'm being generous, I can hear and understand this argument, that they think Keir Starmer is saying or doing whatever he needs to do or say to get rid of a Conservative government. And then once they're in power, he's going to pull all of these progressive policies out of his hat and start doing progressive things. But precedent shows that the Labour Party, whenever they get into government, govern to the right of where they campaign. So they're already campaigning in a pretty right-wing space, which on some issues is to the right of the Conservative government. We can go straight back to Israel and Gaza, actually. And it's astonishing that David Cameron is in a position that's slightly more progressive than where Keir Starmer is in terms of talking about the occupation. Not just on international affairs, there's other issues too, where the cash review that was just released yesterday, highly problematic things in that cash review that just feel like they've not been done in consultation with trans people. The Labour Party came straight out of the gate and said, we accept every recommendation in this report, a 400-page report, in a time that I imagine they probably didn't have time to read that report. Whereas the Conservative government came out and said, we will consider this carefully. Now, that's a whole nother conversation, but just it struck me that the Conservative government were in a kind of more cautious place towards the rights of trans people and including their voices than the Labour Party were in. And so what's happened to the Labour Party? I think a lot of it is fear. I think we have an inherently right-wing media, which is why it's really good, James, that you're doing this podcast. And I always support independent podcasts and groups like Novara Media. And again, Owen Jones, who I think are giving people the platform to have alternative voices, where we've got to challenge the rhetoric of the Daily Mail and the Sun and Sky News that are just pumping out Murdoch's lying the entire time. They're terrified of all of those news outlets. And I think there's something about wanting to run against the Tories, but still know that you have to deal with the culture war stuff. And in the Green Party, I would always say that you deal with the culture war stuff by being bold, by being courageous, by being valued, by following your values, by listening to people and making sure that you communicate clearly. That's how you challenge the culture war stuff. You don't challenge the culture war stuff by appeasing it, or even worse, by falling into the same traps and then making their argument for them. And I think on a lot of those issues, the Labour Party have completely lost their way. And then I think finally, there's just the point that, and this is a whole nother story, but I think it's worth telling. So just 2 days ago, I was in Ealing, where the council is run by Labour there. A council leader called Peter Mason, who I've had runs in with the past publicly, particularly around a site called Warren Farm, which is a nature reserve. He was looking to de-wild it, so to destroy the nature. I called him out on it, and he sent kind of several, I would say, childish kind of tweets. Anyway, we put on lots of pressure, and they've now reversed that decision, which is really good. So that's an example of where we pushed the Labour Council into winning. And one of the arguments we made was that they were making deals with property developers. Quite obviously, one was Berkeley Homes, and then they were sponsoring Pride events. Peter Mason also took thousands of pounds worth to go on a holiday in Cannes. He then apologized for that and said, it was a mistake, etc. But all of these things were going on. Anyway, this is all context for what I'm about to say next. So I went to visit an estate that's been called the Green Quarter. The Green Quarter is housing that has been built next to contaminated landfill. The housing is largely luxury developments with a few blocks of social housing. That social housing has been put right next to the contaminated landfill. When I've walked through this site with the residents, there's a very obvious smell of petrol. You can feel it in your lungs. It makes your eyes itchy. These residents, time and time again, have been sounding the alarm. about the fact that these property developers have just been not listening to them, and that this seems to have been done in stock with the Labour Council. And the Labour Council, under the guise of saying we need to build more homes and not worrying about whether that's social housing or unaffordable luxury homes, have been putting up these homes all over. There are air pollution monitors in that area, and they were collecting the data. They've just put in an application to build thousands more homes on this same site, and the air pollution monitors have just disappeared and gone missing. So I don't want to do Weasley words on this because I don't have the obvious evidence and proof because the air pollution monitors have gone. I don't have the contracts between the Labour Council and these housing developers. But what I would say is there's certainly other examples in other Labour councils where there are very clear links between the people making the decisions and the property developers. That can either be at the same time the decisions are made or more often than not, the councillor retires, having made years on the housing department or on the planning department, and then it's a revolving door straight into working for a property developer. So what has gone wrong with the Labour Party? I'd say it's the same with the Conservative Party. It is lack of transparency, it is lack of accountability, and it's for profit motive, where ultimately this kind of hyper-capitalist neoliberal system has meant that they are ultimately worrying about their own vested interests, and they have disgustingly built it upon the language of doing this for working people and building social housing. Whereas if you want to build social housing, but we never see social housing built. It's always just a couple of blocks that are built with other properties. And by the way, in the same project, there are facilities that are open if you're in the luxury departments, but those same facilities aren't open to you if you're in the social housing. And this is in the same neighborhood. This is no different to the idea of pour doors, which used to be built in social housing blocks where the expensive kind of buildings or expensive rooms would have one door, but if you're in the social housing, you'd have another door. This is alongside something else that my colleagues in the Assembly have been calling out, which is poor playgrounds, which are playgrounds that the unaffordable luxury apartment families are allowed to use, but the social housing children aren't able to use those playgrounds. That breaks my heart, the idea that there is a young person who will see a slide or a roundabout and go, Mum or Dad, whoever's at home, can I go play on that? No, we don't have access to that. Like, what kind of society are we building if that's the kind of society that a child's growing up in? Sorry, that was a huge tangent, but the question, what's gone wrong with the Labour Party, has multifaceted answers.
Huge tangents and rants are what we're all about here, man, so go for it. No, that was awesome. I totally agree with you as well. I mean, if they want to talk about performative politics, nothing's more performative than the Labour Party paying lip service to Labour values and left-wing ideas when they're actually just lining the pockets of the 1% and further enabling the complete corporate takeover of all of our hard-won assets in every facet of our daily life. And there's a guy that I had at the podcast previously called Professor Richard Wilkinson, who wrote an amazing book called The Spirit Level, who I quote quite often on the podcast because his work makes it an indisputable fact that all of the growing societal problems that we've had in this country and that we've seen explode in the past few decades are as a result of growing inequality that began in the 80s with the arrival of Thatcherism and Reaganism. And he proves without a shadow of a doubt that there is a direct correlation between a whole range of societal problems and the level of inequality within that society. And if we look at the Labour Party of today, there is absolutely zero chance that they are going to do anything to reverse that race towards an ever more unequal and unfair society.
Yeah, and I think also Labour is this huge spectrum as well where, let's be clear here, there's some Labour MPs that I've got time for, Clive Lewis, Nadia Whittemey, Zara Sultana, they're good, solid people. I don't even mean this as a political attack because I'm not in their position. And if you're an MP and you're doing good work, I can see how you go, is this, better for the greater good? But I do wonder how it sits with their conscience that they're in that party and representing that party. Yeah, the national leadership are doing those things, but I'm not throwing stones there. In some ways, I'd rather we have some progressive MPs in the Labour Party than no progressive MPs at all. But I do think that's reaching a breaking point too, where they're greenwashing, and I don't just mean on environmental issues, I mean on every issue. The Labour Party, because Keir Starmer is able to point to this handful of good socialist MPs and go, see, our party's not all that bad. But there's a spectrum. I talked about Sadiq Khan before being one of the better ones, but then if I compare him to Mark Drakeford, which I know you'll know well in Wales, Mark was doing some really good progressive things like a universal basic income for care leavers. I was able to point to Sadiq Khan and say, look what Mark Drakeford's doing, look what Andy Burnham's doing. But then again, in Wales we see a new Labour leader there who looks like they're cut from a very different cloth to Mark Drakeford, and Labour in Wales is taking that horrible turn, or much sharper turn to the right as well. So I never buy this idea that Labour are okay because they've got a couple of good people in it, because fundamentally, institutionally, and systemically, they are built to protect vested interests and capital. And until that duopoly is broken up, then that means we will just keep on this pendulum swing between Labour and the Conservatives. And when we get Labour, it might be marginally better, but they will still be protecting the same interests the Conservatives are protecting. They just do it under the guise of social justice.
100%. Yeah, and well put as well. And that's why, like I said, it's so good that we've now got you guys in the mix as well as a very viable option for people to get behind. So with regards to that, I don't want to give any more airtime to Labour. I want to devote the rest of the conversation to talking exclusively about the policies within the current Green Party manifesto on issues such as the NHS, employment, immigration, and of course, the environment. Because unfortunately, I feel that there are still some people who don't understand fully that the Green Party is not a one-issue party. I think there are still too many people that think the Green Party stands for protecting the environment and green spaces over and above everything else, such as jobs and the economy and industry and welfare and the health service. And that's a shame because nothing is further from the truth. So I think it'd be great to shatter that misunderstanding once and for all, because anyone that would traditionally vote for Labour or they might have left-leaning politics now needs to vote for the Green Party. Because as we've established, Labour no longer represent those ideals, and the Green Party most definitely do. So I would like to jump in and do a deep dive on what the Green Party would do to fix some of the many dire problems that we're dealing with as a society right now. And I think the best place to start would be the cost of living crisis, because so many people are really, really struggling right now. So what would the Green Party's solution be to the cost of living crisis?
Yeah, so first of all, I think your question is entirely right. That there is this misconception that the Green Party just care about, polar bears and forests. And I really care about polar bears and forests. They're really important things. So I'm not here to say that they're not. But ultimately, there's no environmental justice without racial, social, and economic justice too. All of these things are interconnected. So if I just give a very quick example, and then I'll come on to the cost of living crisis. Toxic air is, an environmental issue on the face of it. This idea that people should breathe clean air is, really an environmental issue. But actually, when you look at the places that have toxic air, they're frequently in our cities, and they are very much clustered around working class communities and black and brown and or ethnic minority communities. So there's a real disparity and racial disparity and economic disparity between the people who do have clean air and have access to green spaces and those communities that are disadvantaged, or often disadvantaged by design, by politicians and by legislation, who are being disproportionately affected by these issues. So it's always joining up those dots. I've already talked as well about housing. So making sure that people have well-insulated homes. Yes, it's an environmental issue, but ultimately the homes that are often least insulated are homes that are built badly. If you've got a badly built home, it's probably because you couldn't afford to have a home built properly, or you're buying a cheap home. And that means your bill is going to be higher. Also, if you can't afford to pay that bill, you'll probably have a prepayment meter on there, which is also a poverty premium because you get charged even more because you have that prepayment meter. So again, sometimes with the Green Party, you can be on one issue and you can actually jump to about 10 different issues because all of these things are interconnected and threaded. So this isn't me pushing away the environment of the climate crisis. That is clearly the ticking clock that we need to deal with, because if we've got the climate crisis and we've got nothing else. But ultimately, what kind of society are we trying to build if we're not trying to build a society that has more cohesive communities, that tackles the gender pay gap, the disability pay gap, the ethnicity pay gap, where people don't feel like they have a purpose in society? People have to have that kind of inbuilt purpose, where we have community centres and faith centres and youth services, a police force that we can actually trust, that doesn't over-police and under-protect, particularly minority communities, and also, frankly, a place where Wales and Scotland as well feel that they have the right devolved powers and or independence, depending on what the people of Wales or Scotland want, where they're not tied to a Westminster government that are making the decisions for them. Power should always be at the most local level it can possibly be. So that all being said, the cost of living crisis, also, an environmental issue. But if we take it on its kind of face value, it's an inequality crisis. I've already talked about a wealth tax. We also need to do things like bring capital gains tax in line with income tax. That sounds a bit policy wonkish. So just in 30 seconds, what does that mean? Well, it means at the moment we tax people more for working a day's work than we do if you just happen to have houses and assets and lots of things that you might not even have worked for, that were inherited from generations gone by. I saw a podcast recently, and I can't remember the woman's name, Oh, that's annoying. She was doing brilliant work, though, talking about taxing billionaires out of existence entirely. Like a billionaire is essentially a failure of policy because no one should have that much money. And the argument always is, someone works for it, should they not have that much money? But let's take Beyonce, for example. I adore Beyonce. Let me start with there.
Don't we all?
Lemonade is one of the best albums ever made. But ultimately, she made a lot of money that she rightfully made from being incredibly talented. But also there comes a point where you can't make that much money as she's made from being talented. You then put that money into housing, into assets, and then you're making money on money for doing absolutely nothing. And so the gap just gets wider and wider and wider. And again, this is not a knock at Beyonce, but that is nothing to do with her talent or her hard work. That's to do with a system that is inbuilt to widen inequality gaps. And as you talked about from Richard Wilkinson's work, that actually is bad for everyone, including the super rich people, because everyone profits as in their well-being rather than economically from a society that has equality at its heart. Because if we don't have a good functioning national health service, and that creates the mental health crisis that we're seeing. And if we have a privatized healthcare service, that means people are ill. And we saw during the pandemic, if people are ill, that affects everyone, whether you're rich or poor. If you have a police service that's not funded properly, then that creates crime, and crime affects rich people as well. And so having a more equal society where everyone has a stake in it and you have properly funded public services is good for everyone, whether you're someone who directly uses those public services or not. And I think on top of that, it's about making sure we pay people properly. So we were the first party, I think the only party, to have publicly backed trade union calls for a £15 per hour minimum wage. And I think, again, that's really important in terms of people say, well, how do you afford these things? Well, you afford these things by making sure you're prioritizing the right things. And then finally, just on cost of living crisis, a policy I'd say I'm proudest of is a universal basic income. This is known about in Wales more than almost anywhere else because the Welsh Senedd have given care leavers from the age of 18 a universal basic income for, I believe, 18 months. The results are starting to come out there from an amazing Professor Guy Standing, who's done a lot of work on this. He was a former advisor to John McDonnell and definitely a very good friend of the Green Party and a personal friend of mine who has been really, really valuable in advising and steering around our economic policy. But the results are showing, yes, these people are less poor. That's very obvious if you give them more money. But I would say much more interestingly, it's affect things like nutrition. People are eating better. People are able to go into education and training because they're not just worried about putting food on the table. And also it's niche, but I think really, really important. They're able to engage politically because actually to get involved in politics, you have to have a bit of free time while you're doing your job. I was an actor, so I was fortunate enough that, when you're an actor in London, same for lots of musicians, fortunately not you, James, but lots of people when they're doing these, artistic roles, they're also having to do about 10 other jobs. So they're a barman, they're a waiter, they're working in a call center. And I was doing all of those jobs, but the flexibility of those jobs meant I could also get involved in politics. But if you're working a 9-to-5 job, Monday to Saturday, you probably want to rest on the Sunday, and lots of political action isn't necessarily happening on the Sunday. So people are being kept out of the political loop and being kept out of making political decisions. So universal basic income would both transform people, yes, in terms of their economic situation, but it would also make sure that we're enriching people's lives in all of these other ways too. And I'm really proud that in London, Finchley, in a place called Grange, we're looking at getting a pilot off the ground, and that's something I've been pushing hard on the London Assembly, and also Jarrow in the northeast, somewhere which historically has had huge deprivation and poverty. And in the early 1900s, there was a famous march for jobs, where people walked from Jarrow to London to protest the government's decision. So symbolically, having a universal basic income pilot there is really important too. I can keep going on with this question because I guess cost of living crisis is almost everything. Like, how do you enrich people economically is the fundamental question. But I think those are kind of some of the key headline things. Oh, and also, sorry, very last, but removing the anti-trade union laws, but not just for recent ones, actually. These go all the way back to the 80s, which have fundamentally disempowered our trade unions. And people need the fundamental ability to organize in their workplace. That is and should be a fundamental human right. And there's been a very targeted dismantling of this, both from a Conservative government, but again, cheered on by the Labour Party, which is absurd that they're called the Labour Party and they haven't been there to stand up for trade unions. But that is very much at the heart of our party policy as well, is standing up for workers.
Wow, man. Well, you're getting me fired up just listening to you, man. It's like, taxing the rich and leveling the playing field and strengthening the unions and universal basic income. What's not to love? Who's not going to want that? You know what I mean?
Well, the corporate CEOs are the people who don't want it. So that answers your question. And that's
Yeah.
the problem we have because they're funding the media and they're funding the Tory party and frequently giving donations like private healthcare to West Streeting. So it's exposing these things, which again is why these podcasts are really important. And then it's not just exposing them, people have to vote differently. We get the politics we vote for. And if people want green and they want a difference, then they have to vote green.
Well, I had your friend and colleague, Mr. Anthony Slaughter, on the podcast last year. And we were talking about effective means of change. And I was talking about activism and protest and direct action and my general feeling of disillusionment with the electoral system. And Anthony said all of the above, are essential components and tools of a democracy and progress. But ultimately, without systemic change, real economic, political, regulatory, and legal change can't happen unless the machinery of power changes. So we can make as much noise as we want, and we should, but without real governmental systemic change, we're going to have a long mountain to climb. What are your thoughts on that? Do you agree with that?
100%. And shout out to Anthony Slaughter too. I'm really proud of Anthony. He's the leader of the Wales Green Party. I think he's like the perfect example I often think of someone who's so embedded in communities and doing the work and not necessarily doing it, for Anthony wouldn't mind me saying this, in the kind of delicacy or showbiz way, although I think he was a drummer in a rock band. So I
don't know, a punk rock band, yeah.
Yeah. So actually, maybe I take it back. The show business is there. But I think, fundamentally, when you talk to Anthony for 5 minutes to hear how deeply embedded these issues of justice are within him and what a difference he wants to make for Wales. And he'll be running for the Senedd in 2026 is the next Senedd elections, I believe. And I think national government and Westminster often get the headlines, and it is really important that we have representation at national level to be able to change things. But also those regional assemblies, or obviously Wales isn't a regional assembly, but the assembly for Wales, the Senedd, being able to make the difference there would make a huge difference for Wales, because all of these issues I'm talking about, there's places like Wales, but also obviously the north of England and the northeast, where the economic disparity is so blatant and the gap has just got wider and wider and wider. And so when Boris Johnson talks about levelling up, don't often say this, but it's one time that Boris Johnson was right. Of course, every solution he had to it was only going to make things worse. But the principle of regional inequality is something we should all talk about. And we shouldn't shy away from talking about it just because the Conservatives hijack that agenda. We just need to be clear that the solutions they offer would make it worse. But there are clear solutions to dealing with regional inequality. And sorry, I'm tying myself in knots here, but the very last thing I want to say is this isn't saying though that London has it all easy, and I think there's often that misconception. You can walk down the street in London and see million pound houses, and then right in front of them, homeless people. Again, I think in London it's just even more intense, that massive inequality. But particularly there's lots of places in this country that have been really neglected and lost, and we need those voices from within them speaking out.
Yeah, you're totally right, man. I mean, the inequality is so stark now. I mean, it's everywhere. You can't avoid it. Everybody is exposed to it now. And it is more pronounced in a place like London, where you've got those two polar opposite worlds kind of slammed together on opposite sides of the street, where you can have a row of high-rise banking buildings overlooking, a real poor housing estate where people are genuinely struggling to get through the, day to day. But I'm seeing that stark divide now more and more everywhere that I go when I travel around the country. I mean, it's I walk the streets of Cardiff or Newport, where I'm based. It's just, I've never seen a homeless situation so bad. It's exploded beyond anything that I've ever known in my life living here, And it's not just the mind-blowing number of people who are now living on the streets. It's the extreme grimness of the situation that they're living in. The desperate level of their poverty is just visceral. And that's happened in the last 10 years. I just do not remember it ever being like this 20 years ago. And everybody feels that now. Like we all share the same high streets, rich, poor, in the middle. So everybody is aware of this now. Nobody can pretend any longer that our social situation is not as bad as it is.
Yeah, I went to visit recently and also went to Port Talbot, and just, you kind of, it was avoidable. It's just a very obvious thing. It's not like for decades people haven't been saying we need to transition, we need a green transition, let's create new industries, let's create jobs, let's make sure they unionize, let's make sure people are paid properly. And just, again, from the Conservatives and from Labour, there was no sense of creating a a different way or having the imagination or creativity to create a different way. And they have let thousands of people down. And those people are in these horrendous situations. I went also to Swansea and visited there a baby bank and a warm bank, and just, amazing work that people in the community are doing where people are homeless or they've got homes but they can't afford to heat them, so people are gathering in the day, and they're also creating social space. And these people running these spaces are incredible, and there are no words I have for how much love I have for the work they do day in, day out. And by the way, I'm an elected politician, but I put the work they're doing so far above what any politician is doing, because it's just grounded in the work and it's serving the community every single day. But they absolutely shouldn't be having to do that. And every day that they're doing it is a failure of politics to be able to serve them. So it's not discounting what they're doing. They're filling a gap that badly needs filling. But ultimately, if we keep filling those gaps and if we keep relying on charity and community people to do it, that furthers the austerity agenda, because it just requires on the kindness of people, and kindness will only create resentment in the long run when people can't afford to give kindness or don't have time to give kindness. So again, massive shout out for everything they're doing. And we need to, and I'm sure they would agree, create a space where they're no longer needed to do those things, because I'm sure they don't even want to be doing them. They'd rather be giving love and compassion to creating art or to create nice things and positivity, not to just, making people survive hour to hour.
Yeah, well put. Well, moving on to a different topic, what about the NHS, the other biggie? What would the Green Party policy be with regards to our beloved National Health Service?
Yeah, so the NHS is in a really bad way. And it sounds twee, but the very first obvious thing is you need to fund it. And people will go, I can imagine if there's a Conservative politician on this call, which gladly there isn't, but if there was, they'd be going, we keep throwing money at them and it's inefficient. And I think there is some truth to that, as in there are certainly ways that the NHS could be operating in a more democratic, more service-led way. And I'll talk about those in a moment. But that argument should never be put in front of the funding argument. If you don't fund things properly, then of course they're going to break down. Of course, staff are going to be resentful. Of course, people who use the NHS are going to feel like they're not getting a good service. And I shouldn't speak for everyone, by the way. I've certainly used the NHS recently and had a really good service. So it's not to say this is every single person's experience, but the stats on waiting lists and on waiting times for treatment are pretty stark and are failing. Now, we know this has been managed to decline from a Conservative government and the Labour Party under Tony Blair through PFI contracts, who have never believed in a National Health Service. So it's been in their interest to run it down. I won't tangent there, but the BBC being a similar thing too, where they've created such a poor environment around the BBC that I find myself rallying against the BBC and complaining about the BBC while still absolutely believing in the need for a public state broadcaster. And this is what happens when they damage these institutions so badly that people then end up turning against the institution, as opposed to the people running the institution badly and the bad decisions, while still absolutely protecting the NHS and still protecting the BBC. I also, it's a tangent, but I think it's an important one. My partner, Richie, works in palliative care, and the fact that the majority of hospices where people are going in their very illest state, where they're literally about to die, are being run off charity and private donations rather than from a national healthcare service is a massive indictment and failure of how our services are running. And I met with the chair of the BMA recently, the British Medical Association, and spoke to him about palliative care. And it's something that they've just done a report on recently. I'm only putting it out there because obviously I'm biased because of what my partner does, but I do feel like there's not often a conversation about death in society, and also the need for dignified dying and assisted dying. And I think all those conversations are starting to bubble up to the surface. And I think that's a really healthy thing, despite the toxicity of our politics at the moment, because I think we need to have conversations about how people can be cared for in their last few days, weeks, months. Back to the point though, on the NHS, where it clearly cannot go is where Wes Streeting seems to be pushing it with every kind of sentence he pushes, which is towards a privatized system or privatization through the back door. We should be really proud of our National Health Care Service. And I went to see Nye recently at the National Theatre play about Nye Bevan, who created the health service. And I think we need to get back to those fundamental principles about a service that is free at the point of need and free at the point of use. And that cannot be up for negotiation. I think what can be up for negotiation or needs to at least be discussed about with a national conversation is it the best use of GPs' time to be doing business and accounts? And from the GPs that I hear from, they don't think that's a good use of their time. They feel like they're rushed from the decisions that they're made, that they're not able to have those patient-centered conversations. So very often it's about just diagnosing the problem as quickly as possible, which is what happens when you incentivize targets and incentivize getting people through the door, as opposed to having those holistic conversations and joining up the mental health crisis that we have with people's physical pain and being able to have those conversations. And then finally, it's slightly off the question, but I think it's important. I met with an organization recently called Debt Relief Advice. So this links in with the cost of living crisis slightly. They're, again, a brilliant organization. They're there when people have got themselves into horrendous debt or any debt at all and just want to talk about how they manage that debt and not make it worse and who do they pay first, etc. And they've started to create kiosks where people can go to that they would like to be in shopping centres, where someone can go into this kiosk if they're worried, and there will be a counsellor there on the other end. There will be debt relief advice on there on the other end. There'll be gambling advice there on the other end. There'll be mental health support there on the other end. And I could think of lots of other services that could be there on the other end. So you're starting to join the dots together. Now, just a caveat in here, my slight kind of skepticism is I think people need more human contact and need more to be in a space with a human being. So I kind of, I'm a little bit nervous about removing human beings and replacing them with a screen where you get to talk to another person. But I do think there is something to be said for the efficiency of someone being able to contact all of these people who would be very difficult to have them all in the same space and be able to go where someone might be, which is a shopping center. So I don't think it should be a replacement for human contact and those services. But I do think there's something really important, and this comes back to the NHS question, about being in the spaces where people aren't necessarily looking for that help. They might be ill. They might not go to a hospital or to their doctor for whatever reason, but they might see in the shopping centre or a play centre a kind of space they can go and know that it's a safe space where they can reach help. And I just think that that's really important, because the people who need the most help, my experience from going around to communities, are often the people who seize up when I come in the room, because they don't want to talk to a politician. They don't want to talk to, I wouldn't consider myself establishment particularly, but anyone connected or involved with any formal institution, they worry it's there to punish them or sanction them. Now, there's ways I found around that, which is to build a rapport and to build a connection and just, think about how I approach that situation. But I think about the people who wouldn't even be in the situation where I am to even have that first point of contact. And I think there's so many people being left behind that we've got to get to them. The phrase that's often used is hard to reach, and I hate that phrase because no one's hard to reach. It's about how you do it.
Love it. Yeah, I totally agree again. I mean, I'm finding it hard to find anything to disagree with you about, to be honest. But I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate because I think another massive issue of concern for many people is the subject of immigration. And we run the risk as lefties of being seen as being soft on this issue, with being a bunch of like woke, naive, wishy-washy, hippy-dippy lefty snowflakes. And the subject of immigration is already being used as a kind of electoral battleground, And I think it's a deal breaker issue as well that will sway many people and unfortunately sway them towards policies that would inevitably be detrimental to their broader interests. So I'd love to know what the Green Party's policy would be on the subject of immigration.
So I'm going to start by linking this directly to the NHS, that people are worried about seeing a GP or getting a dentist appointment. And they're right, they should be worried about those things because they're not being funded properly. But they're not being funded properly because of years of austerity and the Labour Party refusing to challenge that austerity. They're not being funded properly because of migrants, refugees, asylum seekers. These are some of the most vulnerable people in our society, also some of the most resilient. If you've come across on a boat or a lorry, you've clearly shown incredible resilience. But these people actually deserve every ounce of compassion we have, and not just compassion, but ultimately the policies and the support that put them in place. I was just so I talk about immigration all the time with our very pro-migrant policies, and I don't think migration is something that should just be tolerated. I think it's something that should be celebrated. This is something I say about 20 times a week, so I'm very used to saying this. But the reason why I paused just then is I was speaking to someone just a couple of days ago who shaved my beard, actually, was my barber. who is a migrant, and he talked to me. I've known him for a while, and we talk about lots of things about politics, but it's the first time he opened up to talk about his journey. I'm not going to give any specifics, just to keep his anonymity, but talking about crossing the borders and the journey that he made, and just went into intense graphic detail about what it was to make that journey. And I just I talk about migration all the time, and it's something that I feel very, very instinctively that I want to do everything I can to support people and treat them as human beings. And it's still slightly abstract until you're with someone and you're looking them in the eyes and you see their humanity. And I meet asylum seekers and refugees and migrants fairly commonly when they go on protests or rallies or speak with them on panels. But that's in a very particular context. And it was just quite something for someone I've known for such a long time to then open up in that way that's really affected me and has reaffirmed my kind of desire and want to talk about this as much as possible. Because, to come back to the beginning, people do have legitimate fears about infrastructure, about housing, about NHS, but this is in no way problems of migration. And I also think I sometimes see politicians be compassionate towards refugees and asylum seekers, and that's important. I'm pleased they're doing it. But they really separate them from migrants. And yes, they are separate to an economic migrant. But I still think we should be making the same argument about an economic migrant. If you were someone who is looking for a better life, who has grown up in poverty or a place where you don't feel like you have a chance, then the only reason why our country would decide that you're not welcome here to contribute to our tax system, to our businesses, to our culture, is because of some petty-minded racism. And I think it needs to be called out as racism, because that's exactly what it is. And when we see people open up their arms to Ukrainian refugees, which we absolutely should do, and this is nothing against the Ukrainians, they're suffering a horrendous incursion, and we should do everything we can to defend them, and particularly see their humanity in giving them homes. And I'm pleased people have done that. But where is that same compassion for Syrians, for Yemeni people, for Somalians, for people suffering in Sudan through this absolutely horrendous crisis? And I'm led to, it can only be called racism. And I don't know what I don't know, so it might be other things, and I'm open to having that conversation. But I've never yet heard an argument against someone fleeing from war, from suffering, from persecution, and or running away from economic poverty or lack of feeling like they have a future and wanting to make a better life. And I don't think the restrictions to a better life should be where you happen to have been born. Should there, is that a complicated question around migration? I was about to say yes, it is, but I don't even think it's that complicated. We are going to get migrants, frankly, whether we want them or not, because of the climate crisis. We're already seeing places that are uninhabitable where it's getting hotter. Syria, the civil war, of course, is primarily because of a brutal dictator. But it's also often missed that brutal dictator is able to be so brutal because of an increasing lack of resources, of scarcity of food and water. And we know that those conditions are going to happen across the world and also, frankly, here in the UK too. And so we need to have those very difficult conversations about scarcity of resources and how we find the compassion to do that in that way. The just epilogue I want to put to this, though, is I sometimes hear, and I'm hearing it less and less, which is good, that people, would then go, but you're a Green and you support migration. But what about overpopulation? And that's an argument that's made, and it often kind of verges into what I would describe as eco-fascism. This idea that, they start talking about minority communities who have lots of children or other countries. But we need to be really clear that we are a country that benefited from the Industrial Revolution. We're a country that benefited from empire and colonialism. And the idea we would point to countries that are less economically well off than us and say, we've profited from all of this, we're thinking about stopping, but you need to stop right now, as opposed to recognizing the complexity of that conversation, particularly around the global south. Do we need to encourage countries to come off oil and gas? Yes, absolutely. This isn't saying blank check for everyone, keep going. But the idea that the overpopulation issue is the bigger issue here, as opposed to the fact that I think it's the 1% globally have burnt more carbon emissions than the bottom 2/3 of humanity. Like, it's a mass inequality here yes, on a national scale, but on a global scale. And that's where we need to be focusing our interventions, not on targeting migrants and refugees. So that could definitely be classed as a rant, but of all subjects, it's the one that sets me off.
Oh, me too, man. Yeah, 100%. That's a subject that will get me from 0 to 100 in like less than a second. And thank you as well for just calling this out for what it really is all about at its core. Because, yeah, we've all seen a vastly different attitude to Ukrainian refugees than those people who are fleeing Syria or Afghanistan or Iraq. And I can only imagine why that might be. But there's an interesting irony to that. I mean, if you are really concerned about immigration for whatever reason, then it makes more sense to support the sort of things that you're talking about as part of the Green Party policy, such as let's work to reverse the climate crisis, which is only going to exacerbate mass migration. And also, hey, let's stop arming and training and supporting foreign dictatorships because it's good for our oil industries. And then maybe, just maybe, people wouldn't want to flee their homeland that they know and love in the first place. So yeah, I completely agree with you on all of that, man.
Can I link one more answer too? So you were being devil's advocate, but now I'm going to be my own devil's advocate. So there's an increasing criticism of the Green Party, this idea of NIMBY, not in my backyard, that we oppose housing. And it's completely untrue, and that's why I'm taking it on very directly. What we actually oppose is housing on greenbelts. So if you've got land that's there for biodiversity, whether it's there for wildlife and species, then that is obviously not the first place you go to build housing. And I don't think that should be controversial. It's only been made contentious because very powerful, again, property developers and vested interests have started to try and paint this idea that that's a problem. If we had no other places to build houses, if there was no brownfield sites, if there was no empty buildings and empty properties and people taking over lots of homes, then there would be a different conversation to have about the green belt. I'm not saying for a second that I would then go, yes, let's build on the green belt, but I would certainly be willing more to have that conversation and to work out where we need to build those houses. The evidence is very, very clear, though, that if you add up all the brownfield sites, all the sites in London, for instance, the TfL own that aren't being used, you'd have a constituency the size of Camden. CPRE, the Campaign for Rural England, have done lots of work around the hundreds of thousands of buildings that are completely empty all across the UK and aren't being used at all. And actually, you could retrofit and bring these homes back into use. So anyway, the reason why I'm linking this to the migration question is the argument is always, we're a small island, we don't have places to put people. We have masses of empty homes, masses of places. And, you know, is this an argument to say, yes, let's have mass migration and bring everyone in? Not necessarily that, you know, I'm not arguing for more migration. I'm just arguing the point that when people say we can't handle the migration that we've got is an absolute nonsense argument. And it's linked with the same nonsense argument that you need to build on the green belt to tackle the climate crisis. You absolutely don't. We're in a nature and ecological emergency. You can both protect green space, you can protect biodiversity, and you can have the houses that people need. This does not have to be a trade-off, and it's been created as a trade-off because it's in the interest of property developers to build on that green space because they can charge more for it. The idea that a family who are homeless, who are living on social housing, are going to be able to live in this beautiful space that's been created on the green belt is clearly nonsense and a completely disingenuous argument.
100%. Yeah, I totally agree. Well, as we come towards the end of the time that I've got you for today, I'm going to try and summarize a little bit because we've covered a lot of ground here in this conversation. So would I be right in saying that we know all the answers to these problems and probably have done for quite some time now, whether it's how to fix the NHS, how to protect workers' rights, how to fix the housing and the homeless crisis, and compassionate and humane solutions to the immigration question? We've got the answers already. They're quite well known. We just don't have the political will from any of the mainstream parties to actually implement any of this stuff. And is it also fair to say that by addressing the urgent climate crisis, which will affect absolutely all of us, regardless of where your politics lie, that the things that we're going to have to implement in order to address that urgent existential crisis will also inevitably, by their very nature, set off a kind of domino effect of solutions to so many other of our social or economic or political problems that we face right now? And as abstract as it might feel sometimes compared to the more pressing day-to-day issues, but by addressing to the issue of the climate and actually doing something about it, we'll be having to also address and fix all of the other problems that have been caused by decades of rampant, unregulated capitalism. Am I kind of in the right ballpark there?
I mean, you summed it up beautifully. I guess all I'd parrot back really is a very quick thought experiment. So suppose it's the 1960s again, and for some reason in this version of reality, we don't know about the climate crisis. We are living through a society where there's a lot of inequality, but we elect different governments. And actually, through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and now in 2024, we have an amazing government. We have an incredibly equal society. Everyone is happy, everyone is being looked after, and people don't have a lot to complain about. And then suddenly we discover the climate crisis. And as a politician, they would then have to come forward and say, this is incredibly difficult, but everything needs to change. That would be so impossible to sell and to get people to vote for, because you would be talking about changing an absolute perfect society to a different society because of the climate. We are not in that situation. We are in a situation where our society is fundamentally broken and we need to tackle the climate crisis. We can change everything to have a more equal society where people feel more valued, where they have money in their pockets, food in their plates, they have heat in their homes, and they have lives lived with purpose. And we can tackle the climate crisis at the same time. This is not a hard sell. People just need to vote for it. And in fact, in the last 4 years, the Green Party have over quadrupled their number of councillors at the local level. And I think that's because the message is getting through. What we need to now do is take that to the national level and make sure we get more Green MPs.
Brilliantly put. Yeah, and I think that's a perfect place for us to park up. What do you want to tell people who've listened to this conversation to do next? Where can they go? What can they do to help get involved?
I mean, the most obvious thing is to join the Green Party. So that is greenparty.org.uk/join, greenparty.org.uk/join. If you're not yet ready to join a political party, and I've spoken to lots of people who, for instance, were very supportive of Jeremy Corbyn, feel very burnt over that and say, I love what the Green Party is saying and doing, but I'm just not ready to join a political party at the moment. We also have a supporters network, so you can go to that on the same join page. What I would say, though, is that this is an argument I've made to lots of people in Labour, and lots of people have eventually come around to the argument that even if you supported Jeremy Corbyn and you're kind of hoping that the Labour Party after Keir Starmer will go back to a left-wing party, Keir Starmer has fundamentally dismantled the mechanisms that were in place to allow Jeremy Corbyn to even ever have happened. So for anyone who wants to see a government of the left, or even MPs of the left who will hold a government to account, it can no longer happen in the Labour Party because they've made sure that they've pulled up the drawbridge behind them. So actually building the movement of the Green Party outside of the two old parties, I would say, is a fundamental place to go. So I really would encourage everyone to join the Green Party, because actually we are one member, one vote, and joining the party is the key way to influence the party in the future to make sure it carries on going in the direction, or even more of the direction, that people listening to this would like to see it go.
And what a time to join as well and to get involved. There's a real zeitgeist happening right now, man. And God knows we could all do with some hope right now. And the Greens are really the only party that are providing any tangible, real hope in this upcoming election. So the choice is not just between Labour and the Tories, guys. There's another real alternative now. So please get involved. The guys in Green would love to have you on board. And God knows we need all the help we can get right now if we are going to wrestle the bad guys. Zack Polanski, thank you so much for everything you're doing. I know how hard you're working, and I know how much this means to you, and I know how genuine and sincere you are about these issues. I wish you and everybody else in the party the best of luck for the upcoming election on July the 4th. The future is green, I know it. The times they are changing, and whichever way it goes down, we are going to be sending a massive message to Labour that they have got to get their shit together. So head on over to greenparty.org.uk, follow the party at The Green Party on Twitter and Instagram, and you can follow Zack Polanski personally on his personal Twitter at Zack Polanski. Zack, thanks so much for giving us your time today. This has been a fascinating conversation. I wish you nothing but the best, and we'll be rooting for you, man.
I really appreciate the platform, and lovely to meet you. Hopefully we'll meet in real life one day soon.
That'd be great. Yeah, 100%, man. Well, best wishes, bro, and thanks again for coming on. Appreciate you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Zack. You too. See you, bro.
Take care.
Zack Polanski, Deputy Leader of the Green Party of England and Wales. What a dude. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I sure did. And if you were on the fence about the Green Party, or you're not sure which way to vote, then I really hope that that cleared up a lot of the misconceptions for you and has made you think that possibly voting Green could be the way for you to go. There are loads of ways you can get involved if you want to. You go to greenparty.org.uk. There are loads of campaigns you can get involved in and loads of things you can do to help the guys with their election campaign as we roll on for the next few weeks. You can also become a member like I am, or you can just further clue up on the policies in their manifesto. I think the next few weeks are going to be a real exciting time for the Greens, and I think that they're just going to grow and grow and grow. Labour are dead in the water, and they shot themselves in the back. Tories, we all just hate them. So simple as. The times are too desperate for us to hide our affiliations, man. I wear my colours on my sleeve, and my sleeves are green. So if you care about your community, if you care about your loved ones, if you care about the society around you, if you care about the planet that we all live on, there's only one party that's going to represent you, man. And that's the Green Party. So let that known on July the 4th when you go to the ballot box. And more importantly, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. If you haven't done it yet, please do subscribe. I know way more of you listen to this thing than actually click the subscribe button. So get on it, man. If you do listen to this podcast on YouTube, then there's a perfect place for you to get involved in the conversations as well. Jump in the comments, let people know what you think, ask some questions. Let's get a conversation going. And if you listen to it on Apple or Spotify or elsewhere, do leave a review and click the star button and, show me some love, man. I'll be back next week with another awesome guest. So stay tuned. Have an awesome week. Take care of yourselves. I'm off to nurse my hangover. Love you loads. Vote green.